All right, I'm gonna take this opportunity. I'm looking at the list now. I know we're gonna have a few other folks join in, and I'm gonna say a couple of words just to kind of set the setting, and then we'll do rounds, and then I'll turn it over to Bob. The first thing I want to note is for everyone who's on the webinar. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I've been blessed to have each kind of come into my life in different ways and different times and contexts over the last few years, but every one of you who's joining us today has enriched my life. So first I want to say thank you for that, and I'm going to learn from each and every one of you today. I have no question. The second thing I want to say to set the table is that this is a we've got two goals in mind today. The first is that this is just going to be an incredible webinar. We're going to learn from one of my teachers in the world. That's Bob Moesta. I'll tell you more about him in a moment. So in and of itself, the next 90 minutes or whatever time now, let's say 83 minutes, I know are going to be an enriching 83 minutes. On top of that, we're also recording the webinar so that for future purposes, we'll be able to introduce this idea of jobs to be done to other faith leaders in the Glean Network, throughout Odessa, and really through this burgeoning field of so. What I want to say regarding that is that we are recording it. I want to invite those folks who are only on audio to add the video. If you're comfortable adding the video, we'd love to see your face and really bring, that will help bring the webinar to life. And the default setting is mute. So just to remind people of how the webinar is going to go, the first 40 or so minutes, Bob's going to be sharing, teaching us. I'm sure Bob will pause to tell us, to ask some questions and invite us to chime in. And then after that, we'll move to the Q&A. And as you saw in the email, the Q&A is really going to focus on your own opportunities to reflect on your jobs to be done. What job did you hire this webinar to do? What job did you hire Glean to do? And then any other questions that you have, as you're thinking about that four forces diagram and how it applies to your life and your work and your faith. So with that said, default setting is mute, but please, please, please unmute yourself, ask any questions. It should be free flowing. But again, the first half of it will be more presentation style, second half more Q&A. And I think that's it.
I'm okay if in the middle of the presentation, I have some room if there are questions or like I said, I'll ask. And so my thing is just either unmute yourself and ask the question, I'll pause, but, either just send a quick chat to say, hey, I got a question, and then we can do it back and forth. I prefer it to be more interactive than what I would say is lecture series. It's hard enough to do it via webcast. I love to do stuff face-to-face, and I'd love to be sitting around a table, but this is, as Clay would say, non-consumption. This is better than nothing, and that means we're doing something, which is great.
That's good. Actually, that's our new tag at Glean, is it's better than nothing.
Oh, most people hate that thing, but the reality is how many people want to join a church but don't know how. Mm-hmm. I think there's more non-consumption in that than I think that we all know. So how do we find it? And that's what I want to talk about.
Actually, the Pew study that came out yesterday shows that 22% of people who are not part of a church, it's because they actually don't know how. Yeah. 22% of people who don't go to church, it's because they don't know how. And that can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. But yes, Bob, you're absolutely right. So with that, let's do a very, very, very brief round. And then I'll be the last person to do the round so that I can then say just a word about Bob. And then no more preamble. We're going to dive into it. So please unmute yourself. We'll just kind of go in whatever order we'll go. Just tell us your name and where what work is bringing you to life today? 10 seconds each.
I'm going to start, and I'm also going to recommend, Elon, that you call people out by name to do that, because there's so many of us, it'll get wild. Just someone else to go.
Absolutely.
I'm Reverend Dr. Chris Davies. I serve at the national setting of the United Church of Christ. I also run a nonprofit called the Queer Clergy Trading Cards, which uplifts the voices of queer clergy and kind of disrupts the notion that queer and religious are two separate things.
Alan Harlem, you're up next.
Well, that's working well.
So far, so good. All right, Alan, you're muted. Sorry, when I call on you, you got to unmute.
Got it. Sorry about that. Hi, Bob. Alan Harlem. I work with Ilan and actually Dan and Aaron and many of the spiritual entrepreneurs on the line. Joined Glean about 6 months ago, and am so excited to meet you and to see all my friends on this podcast, on this webinar.
Great. Jack McGordy, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. It's Jack McGordy, Columbia Business School. Huge fan of Glean, and just glad to be here today to learn like the rest of you.
Jeff Middleman.
Hi, I'm Jeff Middleman. I'm the founding director of Sinai and Synapses, which religion and science, sitting in Claw's offices now, and went through the first iteration of Glean. So it's nice to see people again.
And Rachel McPherson.
I guess I am not as technologically efficient, so I'm joining on audio. And having just left the governor's office, Andrew Cuomo, the New York governor, putting together the Faith Advisory Council, I'm here to listen, learn, and see how this can help the many faith leaders that I know around the state of New York. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. All right, Karen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Perlman. I'm the Senior Associate Rabbi at Congregation B'nai Jeshurun in Short Hills, New Jersey. We are a 170-year-old Jewish congregation, the largest in the state of New Jersey. And we, when I say we, I mean myself and our Senior Rabbi, Matt Gortz, who couldn't be here today. We're in the first iteration of Glean. So I'm very excited to be back in the presence of so much.
Welcome. Dan Liebenson.
Hi, I'm Dan Liebenson. Among other things, I run a program on synagogue innovation with Ilan and Alan. And also I host a podcast called Judaism Unbound, which we kind of look at the big questions facing the future of Judaism. And Bob, I want to say I'm a big fan of yours from your appearance on The Critical Path, which is one of my favorite podcasts. And I've learned from you there already.
Great. Welcome, Dan. Aaron Satterwhite.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you all, and looking forward to this. My name is Aaron Satterwhite. I am on the Call board, and I am a innovation executive. I work primarily in healthcare.
Great. Neil and Mitch.
Hey guys, Mitchell Boone. I'm the senior pastor at White Rock United Methodist Church in Dallas, Texas.
I'm Neil Mosley, the Director of Community Engagement, and we recently took our second campus, the Owenwood Farm and Neighborspace. Glad to be back.
Welcome. And Kirshat.
Hi everyone, my name is Kirshat Özanç. I am from the second iteration of Glean. I am a designer by training and practicing. I'm a practicing designer. I also co-lead a lab at Stanford on rituals. That's how I first met Ellen as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the meeting, to today's session.
Great. And Carla.
Hi there, hopefully you can hear me. I'm Carla with the United Church of Canada in their Innovation and Research and Development arm, so hoping to also glean information from this.
Welcome. Welcome. Last but not least, Greg Smith.
And also interest in this from my healthcare lens.
I'm sorry, Greg, we missed the first half of that. It was muted. Can you say that one more time, please?
Sure, I think I still know who I am. Greg Smith here, coming to you from Odessa, as well as the Mansfield Mission Center in Texas, where we empower people on their journey to economic self-sufficiency and wholeness.
Great. Great, welcome. Okay, and mine is Ilan Babchuk. I'm a rabbi, served in a congregation for 4 years before moving on and becoming the Director of Innovation at CLAW, which is a Jewish think tank, and now the founding director of Glean Network. work. As I look at this list of people here, I call myself a student of every single person on this list, and I want to particularly share my gratitude to Bob Moesta, who, you know, there are a lot of times in your life when you read about these amazing people who are leaders in the field, who come up with these brilliant ideas and who take them to fruition and make it happen. And you know, I remember as a kid, I was never all that much into sports, but I would read these books and then think about, oh my God, what would it be like to meet the author or meet the person who thought of that incredible idea? And once in a blue moon, you get to meet them. And sometimes you're disappointed, sometimes you're blown away. And I was at a gathering at Harvard Divinity School that was facilitated by Reverend Sue Phillips and organized by Casper ter Kuile and Angie Thurston, called How We Gather. And I looked at the list of people there and I said, no way, there's no way Bob Moesta is going to be there. I just read about him in this book. And I've his condo story 1,000 times. And I see him, I run into him at a table where we're kind of, there are some snacks, and I'm looking at the snacks and I'm gathering up the courage to talk to Bob. And I introduce myself and I say, excuse me, Mr. Moesta, da, 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 da. And he says, oh my God, we should totally get in touch. And he gives me his cell phone number. And he actually answered it when I called him. And that was a little over about 15 months ago, 16 months ago. Yeah, he's got it right there. I text him and he answers it. And Bob, you've been my teacher long before then. And I'm really grateful now to call you a colleague and a friend. And Bob, as you'll see, has innovated developed more than 30 different products. And I'll speak for myself. I don't know that I've done anything 3,500 times. And the fact that Bob has been able to bring 3,500 beautiful ideas and manifest them, bring them into the world, is truly remarkable. And you'll see why when you meet him, hear from him, and learn from him. So without further ado, Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm humbled by the group. Like, I'm so excited about the second half because the questions and the interaction are going to be so awesome. Let me just start with telling you a little bit about me, and I'm gonna share my screen here. Hold on a second. One second. Share. Oh, we're gonna do that one, and let's see if that works. Got it?
Perfect.
We're good. Good. All right. So everybody else is muted. All right. This is where there's no feedback, so it'll be a little bit awkward, but that's all right. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Jobs Be Done method. I'm just a regular guy. Like, as much as Elon kind of built me up, the reality is, like, to be honest, I think of myself as a dyslexic kid from Detroit who just gets to do what he likes to do every day. So I'd love to be able to share history and how I created some methods and tools so I could add to this world, if you will. The first thing you need to know about me is I'm an engineer. The reality is I was taking things apart when I was about 3 years old. I learned to put them back together by the time I was 5 or 6 because I just kept getting in trouble. And so the whole notion of being able to mechanically take things apart, the clock, the record player, speakers, just about anything I could actually figure out. It's to the point where my dad would lock the tools up so I couldn't actually take things apart. I'm from Detroit, which is the Motor City, where, to be honest, we've always built things. Is kind of in my blood. My dad was an engineer at Ford. My mom was a school teacher in Detroit, and I've had the gift, if you will, or I've been blessed enough to be able to be involved in over 3,500 different product innovation and launches. Not all of them successful, but the repetition is the way in which I've learned kind of what to do and what not to do. And part of me is sharing on this other end of 3,500 what's worked and hasn't worked. The other thing that you need to know about me is, as a small child, I actually had 3 close head brain injuries, and I'm dyslexic, and I struggle very hard to read and write. And my mother, who was a school teacher, realized if I was labeled in the 70s as a dyslexic, I would go to special ed, and that I would be dependent on the system my whole life. And so she basically taught me how to innovate as a child to work around this disability, which created what I would call our very, very unique abilities. So some of those things include the fact is like reading So the way my mind works, I see the spaces, I don't see the words. And when I see a space on one side, a space on the other, I know there's a word in between, and I see the word from both sides. So but we realized very early on that I could only see words that were 7 letters or larger, and that I could make them out and I could look them up, but anything smaller than that, I literally would lose attention in the moment, and I could not actually remember what I was trying to look up. So larger words I could figure out. So she literally taught me to circle the 5 largest words on a page and guess to what the story was about. I'm 53 years old. I started that about 7, so I've been doing it for a long time. I can actually read things extremely quickly. And to be honest, if I have more reps, go through the book 3 times. I actually have way better understanding of a book than if I were to try to struggle my way through and take 3 weeks to read the same book. She taught me how to, for tests, she taught me how to lip read and to understand people who had to mumble things out loud. So the notion of listening and being able to hear and understand, but she would say, like, don't cheat, don't put the answer that they put. Listen and try to figure out what the answer is. So for the most part, I never really did well in English, but the other part is that inability on one side created some unique abilities where, to be honest, I can see math equations in my head. I can do, what we call n-dimensional math. I can see clusters. I can actually pull out and do some ridiculous kinds of math that most people need a calculator or a computer to do. So all of that said is I've been causing havoc my whole life, but for the most part, I've geared it towards creating new things and trying to create new things that make people's lives better. I've worked on just a wide range of things, everything from I worked on the materials for the stealth bomber and basically radar absorbing materials to protect our country. I worked on the guidance system for the Patriot missile. I worked on Pokemon mac and cheese and basically how to create those shapes and be able to do it repeatedly, to 5-gum base camp, stints, hearing aids, just about everything in between. The places where I've tried to innovate that I'm very successful has been insurance. It's a very difficult market because it's based on fear, and for the most part, it's not as predictable as or useful from my perspective. It doesn't mean I haven't tried, and I continue to try, but it's a struggle, and I can talk about why a little bit. I happen to have the greatest opportunity when I was 18 years old. I met this gentleman. His name is Dr. Deming. I happened to be at a Christmas party with some friends, and I sat down next to him, and I think he said I asked him 57 questions in a matter of 15 minutes, and he asked me at the end of about 20 minutes whether I'd like to be his intern for Ford Motor Company as they're trying to improve the way they did innovation. I had no idea who he was. I did not have a summer job, so I said yes, and he took me to, so my mom was a little freaked out because she's like, going to go to Japan, you're 18 years old. But this gentleman had taught me all about, he's the father of Lean, the father of Six Sigma, the father of TQM. And basically I went to Toyota and Panasonic and Fuji Xerox and NT&T and all these companies to learn how they innovated. For the most part, I was a grunt, and so I was on the front lines, and so I would learn these different tools and methods, and I would bring them to Ford, and then Ford would have me run pilots in different areas of the car to help them go from 72 months down to 36 months in development time. Learned a ton in that space. But Deming was the first person who actually encouraged. I was one of those little kids who asked 1,000 questions, and most people tried to shut me up all the time. And because I couldn't read, I had to figure out a different way to learn. But Deming had picked up very early on the fact is that the reason why I'm asking questions is I'm trying to figure out how things work. And I'm building a theory in my head. And as I build that theory, I now can test the theory, and I can actually figure out how to understand things causally. And when I understand things causally, I can play things out. So he was very influential in terms of helping me double or triple the number of questions I could ask and how to make my questions better. And he gave me frameworks around systems and perspective and how to apply math and statistics to kind of what I was thinking about. And it was a very, very lucky time. I also met with people like Dr. Genichi Taguchi and Fukuhara and Ishikawa and all those people who were kind of, I'll say, the rock stars of the quality world. I was actually working side by side with them, not knowing who they were. 10 years later, I met this gentleman. His name's Clay Christensen. I'll say like myself, I model his behavior. I literally call him on the phone at 7:15 in the morning. Nobody else is in the office, and he picks up the phone, and we just end up talking. I now have been friends with Clay for almost 27 years. We meet once a quarter for 4 hours with no agenda, and we just talk, and we just through. But he actually influenced me a lot with this notion of, he says, questions create spaces in the brain for solutions to fall into. And as an innovator, I kept trying to design products that I think people would like, and that I would try to basically make sure that it was the best product, and that it was a product I could stand behind. And what I realized is that if the consumer actually didn't ask the question, they could never see my product. So it was like, what question is somebody asking themselves the moment before they buy an Apple Watch, or that they buy a new pen, or they buy a new phone? What are they actually worried about, and what are they trying to accomplish by doing that? And the thing is if it works, they're actually never looking for anything new. They're just doing what they've always done. And so to me, it's this question theme that just keeps coming up. And so what I realized is, as much as I want people to buy for what I think it was, I realized that people only buy products for what their purpose is, not mine. And so I realized, and again, being dyslexic, the greatest gift is you realize that you're never right. You're always going to be wrong as reps. So the fact is that by being able to understand the consumer, I need to go ask and try as opposed to hypothesize. Clay in 2010 had a stroke, a heart attack, and cancer in the same year. And I went to see him at his bedside. And as he looked at me, he looked up at me and said, "You know what? I can't die yet because I need to turn what you do into a theory." I had no idea what that meant. For the most part of these, I have about 25 different methods and tools and approaches that I've accumulated over the years. But the reality is like, I just kind of did jobs. I didn't really teach people jobs. It was like my hack for figuring out kind of what the insights were for what marketing would come back with insights. And so he actually was the one who basically said it had broader application, and you could see it in other ways. I didn't really see that. I just saw it as one of the tools that I had in my toolbox as I tried to innovate. And so they end up putting a team together, and the book is primarily, if you haven't read it, but it's primarily about me. Most of them are my clients. The interesting part is I ask a client to write a case study. They say, "No way." Clay Christensen gets on the phone and asks them to write a case study. They say, "Oh, sure." So needless to say, the book is actually a #1 bestseller. It's been on the list since 2016. And to be honest, it's the reason why we're probably talking. The reality is, in doing all these different innovations, successful innovations require 3 things, and it's not like 1 of 3 or 2 of 3. It requires all 3, and they're not mutually exclusive. They're inclusive. And one have to have a clear and good, I'll say, strategic clarity of in a business model about how it's going to work in terms of viability. That the thing has to be viable. The second thing is you have to actually have a clear consumer insight, a hole in the market where you're going to fill, or going after what we call a struggling moment. And in that case, it's called desirability. And the last one is the technical side of the whole world, which is robust systems to do it. And that's feasibility. And so I can have something that's feasible and have something that's desirable, but in some cases when it's not viable, I don't have the right business model. I don't have the right revenue model. I don't have the right way in which to make it work. It fails. So I have to have all 3 of those. And to be honest, I've learned over the years that without having all 3 together and having them overlap, I actually can't create a good innovation or successful. The second part is all of them require trade-offs. The whole world is about trade-offs. And so what happens is people keep talking about the ideal experience or the ideal thing. But what I find is that in the end, we can never, ever make the ideal thing. And part of it is to understand what are the important trade-offs to make. So having something that's ideal is fine. But the reality is ultimately to make it real, you have to figure out what you have to be able to cut in order to make it still successful. And so part of it is to me, it's those value codes of what to cut and how to cut was there. So for me, being an engineer, I understood kind of the technical side. Having Clay in my corner, I understood the strategy side. But this notion of the insight, it happened to come from what I call the word world, which is marketing, where all they have to do is learn how to communicate. If it's easy, cheap, fast, and fun, everybody's going to buy it. But as an engineer, I have to cause it to be easy, fast, cheap, and fun. And all of a sudden you realize like causing it is way harder than just saying it. And so to me, and I never have enough time, and I never have enough money, and I never have enough performance, that I have to make trade-offs to launch anything. And so part of it is I would never get the value code. I'd always get the fact is you need to do all of these things. And if you do all of these things, you'll be successful. And the reality is I could never do all of them. And sometimes it would be successful and sometimes it wouldn't. So part of it was digging into that. So the trap is this, is as an engineer, I was taught this, is to talk to people who want something, figure out what they're really looking for and go build it. And so best example of this is a friend of mine, Michael, who has his third child. And when he has his third child, I have 4, so I understand the difference between 2 and 3 is a big jump. It's usually the difference between the way you kind of manage the household with your spouse. And it's this notion of going from man on man to zone defense. And what happens is as we're going to meet Josh, his third son, we're walking up and I see this 2007 Acura MDX with roughly about 90,000 miles on it. And I have 4 children who play ice hockey, and 2 of them are learning to drive. And I'm like, maybe I can get this car as the hockey car to get these kids back and forth to practice, because otherwise I'm running everywhere. So as we walk up, I see the 3 car seats. I'm like, yeah, I know that's not going to last long. And so we go in and meet Josh and we start talking about everything else. And finally I bring up the car. Hey, Michael, what are you going to do with that car? He's like, oh, I know it needs new tires. I got to get it needs struts. It's got this. I got to get brakes on it. I'm thinking we should get a new car. I'm like, so what are you looking for? And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, his wife, like 2 rooms away, starts, you better not be talking about a car, because I don't want to talk about a car. I'm like, Tracy, what's going on? She's like, look, I love the Acura. I don't want a new car. I know it's hard for the kids, but it's just, I don't want to get a new car. And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, well, the reality is this. I just don't want a minivan. I'm like, okay. I'm not saying you have to get a minivan. She goes, yeah, but if you take that car away from me, I'm going to end up in a minivan. I'm like, fine. Let's help you. So we sit down and we talk about it and say, what do you really want? She goes, oh, what I really would like is the Honda Pilot. I'm like, okay, why? Oh, it has a 3rd row seat. It's got big doors. It's 4-wheel drive, so it's safe. I take it actually to the same dealer. So I start to hear all those things. Michael, on the other hand, Michael says, oh, he wants a BMW X5. And I'm like, why? And I'm like, Michael, it's the same car. He's like, no, but it's a BMW. I'm like, Michael, you're in a different zone, man. You're going to have 3 kids. You will not have that car. He's like, okay. Me being from Detroit, I push him on the Suburban. And they tell me it's too big, too much gas mileage, a whole bunch of other things, and tell me there's no way I can't park it, kids can't get in and out of it, etc. I'm like, okay. I go away, 90 days a day, I come back, and what do you think's sitting in their driveway? But a freaking minivan. And they love it. And the whole note, like, wait a second, you said you didn't want it. I'm thinking about the car to help you go by. And yet you end up with a minivan and you tell me, oh, you know what? It has 2 doors that slide open. I'm just like, really? And what my vision is the fact is this is a $29 billion market of a car nobody wants. Nobody. And the fact is that they all come to the conclusion like, yeah, we'd like to have these other ones, but the kids can now open the door, close the doors. It won't take me so long to get in and out. It's easy to park. I got the camera. It's got all the different things. And so it's this compromise. And what I realize is that people who are here trying to describe what they want, they actually have no idea. And as they go through the process of buying, they actually look at these as prototypes to say, well, maybe it could be this, or maybe it could be that. But they make trade-offs along the way to eventually let that minivan sneak into their life. And so for the most part, if you ask people what they want, they actually can't tell you what they want because they have no idea of what the future is about. And so to me, I had a lot of learning from kind of that example, but that's how I was taught. And that literally failed because I would just build what people told me they wanted and they'd say, nope, that's not it. And so part of this is the lesson to realize that people lie. So what I went back to is like, how do I actually understand what causes people to change? What causes them to finally say, today's the day I need to get rid of my old thing? And when I make that decision about the old thing, how do I decide what the next thing is, right? And so what are you hoping for when you get that new car, if you will? And the craziest part to me is that most people treat it like it's random. It's probability. Well, 42% of the people who live in this zip code and have this income and are in this age bracket, they buy this car. And so everything is put away of correlation instead of causation. And so it just drove me crazy. And it reminded me that Deming kept saying, like, everything is caused. And the reality is when we don't know what causes it, we put it to error. But the reality is the underlying causality is always obvious, and we need to actually dig for it. So don't be lazy and just put everything to error. I'm like, okay. So I changed my mindset to say, what causes people to go from A to B, as opposed to what are the probabilities that people go from A to B. And so it's trying to actually start from the notion of an N of one, is if I can understand what caused one person to do it, and I can understand what caused another person to do it, I can start to see patterns in those behaviors that I can see something different. The reality is that most innovation research was actually really, really backwards to me, because it forced so many bad behaviors, because you talk about people, about what they wanted and what the future was going to be like. But it's almost as kind of silly as asking people, like, what are you going to have for dinner next Thursday night or next Tuesday night? It's like, I can put something out there and I can say, oh yeah, we're going to have, hamburgers. But am I really going to have hamburgers? And is it hamburgers, or is it hamburgers with something else? And is it like, so how do I actually pick it? And the thing is what we end up doing is we create these notions of larger sample sizes can give us the answer to a question that's actually not answerable. And so the reality is to me, is planning is really guessing. And we do this both in projects, as well as forcing consumers to guess about the future. And then if they all talk about healthy, easy, and convenient, then that must be what they want. But there's 1,000 ways to figure that out. So to me, the reality is I don't want consumers to guess what they want. The other part is it turns out that they lie. They don't lie with malice, but they lie because they don't know what they're going to really have for dinner next Tuesday, because there's a lot of variables involved in causing it. But the reality is, if I ask you about what you had last Tuesday, and I understand what were the variables involved in you choosing whatever you had last Tuesday and the outcome you were trying to get on Tuesday, I actually can learn more about the system of how you chose dinner than the way of what dinner you want. And so part of this is being able to understand the difference between looking forward and looking backwards. The other one is a problem that I already kind of talked about, which is this notion of correlation versus causation. And that as I waded more and more into the marketing world, I started to realize that everything, and it was more like a radar system than it was than a causal system. And that if I could triangulate where it was, and what I realized is most advertising and most market research is based on buying media or buying advertising and how to connect with people. And so magazines sell ads by demographic and psychographic. And so they can tell you who the readers are, so you know which ads to buy. But the reality is that data is helpful for innovation. It doesn't help us actually figure out what to build. It doesn't figure us out where to go. It's actually it's like trying to put gasoline into a rocket engine. It just doesn't work. And so I found that the notion is I had to actually work with what I called causal data and understanding what caused people to do things and what was the outcomes that they saw. And it again goes back to Deming and this notion of root cause analysis. What are the root causes, the set of causes that enabled somebody to say, I'm going to buy a new car today, or I'm going to join a church, or I'm going to join this not-for-profit, or I'm going to volunteer my time. It's not random that somebody walks in your door. It's part of this is being able to take the time to actually understand the causality of it. Again, the last thing was Deming yelling at me, like, the consumers actually don't know what's possible. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to find it. And the reality is the innovation is not the consumer's responsibility. It's the producer's responsibility. It's us as people trying to provide services and actually help people understand the progress they can make. And so and we're advertising features and benefits when they can't even describe the problem that they have. And so they don't even know how to go to Google and search for what they're looking for. And yet all we talk about are the features, benefits, and solutions that we can offer. So part of this is being able to relate to them both by the problem that they have, the context they're in, the outcome that they seek, and the trade-offs they're willing to make. So my solution is really kind of a combination of what Einstein talked about, which is I can't predict the future, but if I look at the past, I can find these seeds of causality, these underlying mechanisms of when this and this and this happen, people do that. And when that and that and that happen, people do this. I can actually figure out kind of how to look at the future. And I can see as those lines of causality happen and where struggling moments occur, we can actually figure this out. The second is to only talk who recently switched. So if I talk to the best parishioners who've been at your churches or your religious organizations for a long time, they actually don't know why they're there because it's habit. It's so embedded into who they are. But if I talk to people who recently came to your organization and people who recently left the organization, I can actually learn more in 10 interviews than I could do by talking to 1,000 parishioners. And so to me, we just talk to people who recently switched. And so the other part to me is, because it's lying, I went and got trained in both criminal and intelligence interrogation. And so it's a one-on-one interrogation, say today's the day they're gonna switch churches, or they're gonna switch religious organizations, etc. And understand what causes them to make that progress. So the basic premise behind jobs is this aspect of people don't buy things, they hire things to make progress in their life. And so it's about taking a step back and seeing kind of what exactly they're trying to do. And so to me, at all points, this is kind of the most important slide of everything, which is the struggling moment is the seed for all innovation. If people aren't struggling, they can't see the solution. And so part of this is to find out where and when they struggle, and being at the right place and time, and enabling them to actually see the solution and choose the solution. So to me, for example, I never try to actually build anything that somebody aspires to. I actually only find where people struggle, and the moment they struggle, and then I actually then figure out kind of what does better look like for them, and design products to fit into people's lives. And so by looking at the struggling moment, I can actually then see the sequence of struggling moments to say, if I do this innovation, it solves this problem, but now there's this new struggling moment. That means that I have to have this next solution. So I can see 5, 6, 7 iterations of struggling moments out, and I can build an innovation plan. So when we start to talk about the job, I'm going to break for a minute. I need feedback. Am I doing all right? Good. We're good time-wise?
I think, yeah,
time-wise,
great. We're doing great on time. I just can't write notes fast.
We're recording it, so you're good there.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm just going to, any questions at this point? Just keep going. I'm going to keep going. All right. So, and I got to speed it up a little because I got a couple case studies I got to get to. One is, so the whole notion here is that it's the progress that a person is trying to make in a struggling circumstance, right? Key is to understand the causation. What causes people to move forward, right? What are the things that are going on in their life, and what are they hoping for when they actually pull this new thing into their life? It's about making sure we understand circumstance as well as outcome. So a lot of people will talk about, you just need to know the outcomes people want. But the reality is, if I start here, I start down here and I go here, I value it this much. But if I start here and I go to here, I only value it that much. And so value is actually based on the combination of the circumstance somebody is and the outcome that they seek. And so again, other people might start here and want this outcome. Other people might start here and want that outcome, and they're only willing to pay a price relative to the improvement that they see. And so part of this is to be able to understand the progress that people are trying to make, and what are the struggling moments that they're trying to overcome. The last part is to understand the progress by which they make decisions, and actually the trade-offs they make to get there. And so to me, it's the real customer journey as opposed to the ideal customer journey. And so part of it is being able to understand, again, I will talk about that a little bit. Anyway, so not a new idea. It's been around for I want to say almost 50 years. Ted Levitt said in 1960, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. But the fact is this is a little bit deeper. In Japan, I learned a method called the 5 whys. Why do I want a drill? I want a hole. Why do I want a hole? I want a plug. Why do I want a plug? I want a light. Why do I want a light? I want to be able to read better. Awesome. I'm going to go invent the Kindle. And so part of this is realizing that a lot of times we're looking at the consumer through our product or through our service, and not actually asking them about their life and taking 3 steps back to see what's going on in their life and what we're really trying to actually help them with. Because they're the consumer and they're the ones who value it, not us. So there's 2 really big frameworks that we go through. One is called the forces of progress. And so this is about understanding where as people go through this and we realize that this is where they would keep doing what they're doing, and this is where they decide to do something new. And so one of the things I did in the early 2000s is I built homes. I built 1,000 homes in 3 years here in Detroit with the attempt not to have to travel too much. And so I basically built first-time home buyers, divorced family with kids, and downsizers. Think of your parents. And so the best way to think about this is the house that you grew up in and that your parents own. And this is my 1,654 square foot ranch condo attached to 4 units out in the middle of nowhere. And so the whole aspect is what would cause somebody to leave the house they grew up, they had all basically raised their family in, and literally go buy my condo. And so when I got to the industry, they had all these pre notions of like how people bought and what people bought and what they wanted and how they wanted it. And I realized that when you ask people what they want in a house, they always want 5 bedrooms, they want granite countertops, hardwood floors, and all this stuff. But when you actually see what they buy, they don't buy any of that. And so there's this huge disconnect between what people said and what people did. So when you start to interview people, so what I did is I only interviewed people who actually bought my condos and said, why in the world did you buy my condo, and what caused you to do it, and what were you hoping for when you did it? And so there's 4 forces. This one is the push of the situation. This push actually has nothing to do with my solution, has everything to do with their life. Why in the world would your parents want to move? And what happens is it turns out it's things like in Detroit. So let's talk about Detroit. There's lots of snow. The maintenance of the yard is getting bigger. The house has 4 bedrooms and it's like we only need 2. The fact is we got, it's at some point the neighbors are all moving away. The neighborhood's turning over. We've got a lot of capital tied up into the house. We don't need to have that much capital. We're paying high taxes. There's all these things that they're going to say, boy, we should move. And what the first thing I realized is if they have a current house and they're saying all those things and they have no idea about what to do, I call this bitching ain't switching. So this is where people will bitch about everything, but they actually don't know what to do. And so the moment I show your parents my condo, they literally fall in love with it. It has granite countertops. It's like, this is the kitchen, your mom and dad always wanted. It's the first floor laundry, so laundry doesn't have to go up and down 3 stairs. We don't need a new roof. Oh my God, it's maintenance free. They find all these things. And so as soon as there's this magnetism that causes people to be attracted to it. So now I've got to push and I got to pull. But the reality is that there's these other 2 forces below the waterline that nobody talks about till afterwards. And so the moment that they see the condo, there's all of a sudden these anxiety forces that come up. Like, boy, we got to fix up the house before we sell it. How am I going to sell the house? Holy crap, we got all this stuff in the basement. What are we going to do with that? I don't know anybody out here. Boy, where's the grocery store? How are we going to get to church? Where are our friends? Like all of a sudden this force of anxiety gets larger. So as much as they say, I love these things, deep in their head, they have all this anxiety that pushes them back to the house. And then there's this other one called the habit of the present, which is this force that basically is like, it's like, well, this is where we raise the kid. Where are we going to have Thanksgiving? Where are we going to have the holiday? And so all of a sudden you realize like when these 2 forces, the bottom 2 forces are greater than the top 2 forces, your parents are never going to move. And so by interviewing people and understanding what people are trying to do, I actually found out some really cool insights. One of them is people would sign up, they'd see the house, they see the condo, they put their house up for sale, and all of a sudden, they come in, they cancel. And they cancel because, we tried to clean out a closet. It took us a weekend to clean out 1 closet. We have 15 closets. It took 2 boxes of Kleenex. We're never going to be able to figure this out. It's going to take us longer. We can't buy the condo. And then what happened is I kept hearing people who moved said, yeah, well, we just put our stuff in storage and then let the kids sort through it. So what I did is I actually then said, you know what? I'm going to raise the price of the condo. I'm going to actually include moving and 2 years of storage of the stuff. So we'll come into the basement, pack everything up for you, enable you to actually store it somewhere. And oh, by the way, in the clubhouse, I create a sorting room where we can have your stuff delivered when your kids come over, and they can actually sort through and take what they want, and there's a dumpster included. And so all of a sudden, it gave them time to kind of go through all that stuff. I got a 17% increase in sales. And the notion is that what I was taught in school was just add more and more features that cause magnetism. But the reality is I actually understood about how to anxiety, I actually increased sales even more. And so part of this is when you start to understand the causality of both things that push you towards the solution and hinder you from the solution, you actually have a much wider way in which about solutions. The other thing is called the timeline. And the timeline starts with, well, there's a first thought that, boy, I think we should move. And then there's like passive looking, which is where they talk to their friends, they see the real estate section, they do different things. And then all of a sudden they start to actively look, where they get a real estate agent and start to go see things. And then all of a sudden there's another event that causes them to start to decide and make trade-offs. And then they finally buy. And so the way this kind of works is you say, like, so when did you buy the condo? And they'll lay out kind of when they bought it and how they moved in and what it looks like. And then you say, well, when did you have the first thought? So here's the craziest part. The first thought of my downsizers in moving, 93% of them had the first thought between Thanksgiving and Christmas or New Year's. And what you found is that the fact is that why did they have it there? It was the fact is that they were either setting up for the holidays or they were planning about the next year, but they would all have this first thought, like, you know, we should probably move this year. And they'd have this weird, awkward conversation. They wouldn't do anything about it, but that's when they had the first conversation. I literally turned off all my advertising November 1st because nobody bought a house during the holidays, though all of them started thinking about it. Passive looking is where they look at, they go on Zillow, get all kinds of things, but they actually don't invest time. But all of a sudden, I had this one family like, and then we got a real estate agent. And so my thing is the moment that they commit to something in the process, it's not random, it's not just convenient, it's caused them to do it. And so this is where the interrogation method kicks in. And it's like, well, so when did you get your agent? Oh, it's Sarah. We've known Sarah forever. You know, she's been a family friend for 20 years. I'm like, okay. And when did you sign with her? Oh, I think February. And then you're like, okay, well, when in February? Middle of February, I think. And then you're like, okay, weekend, weekday. And she's like, oh, I don't know. Oh no, I think it was the weekday, and it was near the end of the week. I'm like, okay. So what was going on about that? And they're like, nothing. It was time for us to do it. And then I'm like, tell me about, was it snowing or raining outside? She's like, oh, it was snowing. We had to do this. And then all of a sudden she goes, oh, I remember. And so part of this is being able to pull back the things that are these under little kernels that are there. And she goes, that's when our friend Jim died. I said, excuse me? She goes, well, my husband was turning through the paper and he was looking through the obituaries and he saw that Jim died. And then all of a sudden we had this conversation about, like, boy, Julie's going to have to move this house without Jim. And we both looked at each other and said, we've talked about moving, but we don't want to have that happen to us. We should actually get on this. We should actually call Sarah and set this up. So all of a sudden I realized that I hear it once, I hear it twice, I hear it 10 times. I'm like, okay. So turns out that the downsizers are all looking at the obituaries every day and they're all having this conversation. And it turns out that I'm going to move my advertising from the real estate section to the obituaries. Now, I don't move it to say that, okay, it's the, you know, here's a condo, we can sell you a condo. It's like, time to move, need some help, give us a call. 37% increase in traffic, 70% reduction in my advertising costs, right? So part of this is by understanding the sequence of events, you can actually start to really understand ways in which you can tweak the process or make it more enabling for people to help them make progress. And so by doing these interviews and understanding the causation, it literally helps you then innovate both on what I would say messaging and marketing, product and service and strategy and partnerships. And so that's pretty much what I've been doing. So like this week, I basically have a sprint. We did 12 interviews. We've done analysis. We're to the point where we've got the jobs and we now are iterating around innovations. So let me give you a quick example so you can understand the difference. If you think about Snickers and Milky Way, you think they're both candy bars, they're both made with the same ingredients, they're actually made on the same line and they sit next to each other, right? But when you start to actually interview people around Snickers and when they eat Snickers and Milky Way and when they tend to eat Milky Way, you start to learn actually a very different picture, right? So what happens is Snickers is usually eaten in a case where I missed a meal, my stomach is growling, I want some real food, And the reality is that when I think of a Snickers, I think of something else. I think of like a, a sandwich or an apple or a Red Bull or a coffee. And so the competitive set is completely different than when I think of a Milky Way. And so the reality is that the completely different, and in the consumer's mind, they actually don't compete at all. And so all of a sudden, having done, I'll say, lots of work in the space, you start to realize that one of the things I worked on was on Snickers. And the thing is, the way we made it more food, it was typically missed a meal, have a lot of work to do. I need a mainline food. I'm running out of fuel, and my blood sugar is dropping, and I'm not myself, more or less hangry. And from that, we were able to basically change the layering. We changed the caramel and raised the melting temperature to make it more sticky. So when you take the first bite, it masticates into a ball as opposed to melts in your mouth. And then you swallow it like food, which absorbs the acid, etc. And so we're able to understand how to design the product better, and also how to position the product better. So if you've seen any of the commercials around the Betty White commercial, or any of those notions of, you're not you when you're hungry, they move features and benefits to here's situations where we can help you. And so when I started working with them, they were about 500 million. I don't know if you just see the green screen or you see the whole thing, but either way, they basically went from about 600 million to 3.5 billion in 2012. And so part of this is by understanding the job it does and realizing that, to be honest, even though the industry categorizes it as a candy bar, most people are using it as a meal replacement or a fuel bar. And the whole aspect is that it competes with a completely different set than candy. And so aspect is that it's really not what you're not really selling what people think they're buying. And so that's just a simple example. The reality is we end up doing this thing where we look backwards to figure out how people have figured out it themselves. And for every one person that has actually figured it out, my belief is there's 100, 1,000, a million people behind it trying to make progress that haven't figured it out. And so part of this is being able to study those struggling moments, understand what caused them to do it, and then look forward to say, how do we help other people do it? So we have a value code and trade-offs and design requirements to say, here's how we help everybody else. And the amazing part to me is we do this with a very, very small sample. We do this with anywhere from 10 to 15 interviews of very, very diverse people, both income, age, gender, geography. And we find the Pareto of these causalities, the 20% of things that actually cause 80% of what causes people to change. And so by understanding those things, we can actually see the underlying raw mechanisms of what cause people to change. So last example, and then we'll questions, is SNHU. He's in the book, but Paul LeBlanc heard Clay and I talk in 2010, and he had about 2,500 traditional students. And the reality is he had about 500 online students. And what he realized is that he was serving up the same education to both markets. And he realized that the online market was potentially very different than the others. And so he went off and he started to do interviews, and he started to talk to students and why did people do it. And he noticed some really big demographic differences, but he realized the causality was very different. And so as he started to do that, he started to realize that there were really 5 jobs that people were hiring. Everything from help me escape, which is, hey, I have a job I really don't like. If I go back to school, nobody questions me and enables me to learn something so I can actually go from being a teacher to a nurse, right? Step it up. I have a job. It's more of a blue collar job. But I want a career. And now that I have a kid and I'm married, I need to be able to step up. And so all of a sudden it's like, how do you help me find a better job or move me into a career? The other one is I have a decent job, but it's like, I need to extend myself. I want to continually learn. And so it's that lifelong learner mentality. And what he realized is as he looked at the different jobs that he had the same process by which to actually educate and onboard and graduate people. And he realized that there are really 5 very different doors that people wanted to go to. And when they walk through the door, and it's not like people, it's not people type. It's like at this stage of my life, time and space, where they're at and when they're at it, they're going to open that door. And it might be that when they're 18, they open one door. When they're at 32, they open a different door. When they're at 52, they open a third door. But it's not necessarily people dependent. It's situation dependent and circumstance dependent. So the first thing he did is he went out and changed his advertising, and I have a video in here, but the reality is he was able to resonate, and he generated hundreds of people who want to go to school. And so there's this notion of what we call non-consumption, which is how many people want to go back to school but can't figure it out. And so it's a measure of basically demand that is actually being unmet. And so he actually tapped it. But the problem he had is that when he had registration, they all fell into the common registration process. And having 4 children and all 4 of them gone through or in college or going through it, it's a hellish process. It's the fact that it's 9 months long. You have to be able to do all these tests. And the person who's 32 is going like, I don't want to take the ACT. Why do I got to take the ACT? What do I need that for? And so he basically went to his admissions department. I need you to basically figure out how to go from 9 months of admission to basically figuring out how to actually admit people in a day. And the admissions department literally looked at him and laughed at him. Like, I can't do it in a day. It's impossible. And he's like, well, you know, we got to figure out something, because the reality is there's all these people who want to do it. By the time we get around to them, they're not interested anymore. We have to be able to meet them where they're at. And so he basically said, fine, you guys keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to put a team together, and we're going to figure out how to do this in a day. He didn't figure out how to do it in a day. He figured out how to do it in a week. But what they do is they have an interview with you. You take a survey of what you really want to do. They figure out what your financial, economic situation is. Actually go find out all the classes you've taken everywhere else at every other college and look at it against the credit. They figure out how to basically build a customized version of what your curriculum should be and tell you how you're going to get to the degree you're going to get so you can start tomorrow. And so the whole notion is that by doing, not only basically knowing where the jobs were, but then changing the system to do that, he basically was able to figure it out. So he went from 2010, 500 students to right now, I think 2018, he's almost in the 100,000 unit or 100,000 student range. He basically has his graduation rate every 2 years is growing by 5x. He's gone from 88 million to 450 million. This is a not-for-profit public university that has literally figured out how to tap into a market and add value. So it's beating, you know, all the for-profit universities. It's doing all those kinds of things. And the best part is that over about 50% had student financial aid when they were in 2010. It's in 2016, it was like 97% of the 18-year-old students had financial aid of some sort. And so he was able to see this basically through that. So the story is that there's this notion of non-consumption. People who want to make progress but can't because of access, knowledge, money, and or convenience. And so there's something holding them back to do that. And so when people have this non-consumption moment, what happens is typically people are willing to accept inferior alternatives, like things that are not as good as the best, right? Because they're competing with nothing. And so the notion is like, he's not trying to design the next Harvard or Yale. He's not trying to give you the best D school at Stanford. It's like, literally, if you can't afford to go to Stanford and you can't afford to basically, you know, take the time to take 2 years off to go get your degree, I get it. But here's something I can do that's better than not doing anything. And so for him, he's been able to create a huge market of untapped potential of people who want to make progress but can't, because he's been able to create something. So what I would say is a kick-ass half is sometimes better than a half-ass whole. And so a lot of times we end up over-engineering something or not launching something because it's not perfect. And the reality is if you understand non-consumption, you can actually launch something that's really seems not that good, but the reality is it's just better than nothing, right? And so, and from that, everything gets better. So he started his first online MBA course was very basic, but what he's done over the years is he's literally reinvested the money, and he has the best. If you can't afford to go to Harvard, you can't afford to basically take the time, and you don't really want to do that kind of work. The fact is he has the best online MBA in the world. And now all of a sudden, instead of just serving New Hampshire New Hampshire, he's actually serving the world. And so part of this is being able to say, what are the trade-offs people are willing to make in order to learn? And that's basically how he's framed his thing. And again, he's not the first one. If you think about it, think of transistor radios, right? Clay talks about this one all the time, is that when I could listen to music in the car and I could listen to music at home, but I couldn't listen to music anywhere else. And so the transistor radios, people were willing to trade off moderately sounding music or bad sounding music, but it was just better than nothing, right? And it's evolved all the way from the transistor radio to the Walkman, Discman, to the iPod, to the phone, but everything evolves or emerges from there. I don't need to talk about the rest of those. Well, there's a health care person on this. I actually believe I do a lot of work in healthcare, and if you understand what causes somebody to hire or engage with healthcare, it's actually completely mismatched with what healthcare is designed to do. And so what happens is you have this huge amount of people who want to get better, but they actually don't know how to engage with it, or they're afraid to engage with it. And so part of this is just because the doctors know what to do doesn't mean that the patients are going to engage. And so part of this is actually figuring out how to match and get the consumer side to actually understand when they should go and how they should go and how they should interact. And also getting, because right now everybody interacts with the same person the same way. I'll leave it at that. True non-consumption is really just about being better than nothing, which is, to be honest, as an innovator, is like the funnest place to be. This is where you find a product that just takes off. It literally, all the people in the industry look at it and go like, oh my God, that's just horrible. Why is everybody buying that? Why are they doing that? Why are they going there? And so all of a sudden you start to realize, like, at some point, you just got to be better than nothing. And so, to be honest, this is where, to be honest, lots of growth and lots of innovation happens. Whether we're in the developed countries or even third world countries, this is a really fun place to innovate. So ultimately, we're looking for context and struggling moments, new desired outcomes, why the current product doesn't work, right? How do they actually find the next thing? Why do they hire the next thing? And to be honest, I don't care what they hired and fired, because I strip it all away and I build a specification of what people want. And so I basically have, here's the context, here's the struggling moment, here's the pushes and pulls, here's the anxiety and habits. I create a specification of the opportunity, and now I can actually put any technology into it. I can put any product into it. I can put services into it instead of products. So it's the box that I can now innovate inside, and I know the value code. One warning. And this is actually big in healthcare, and I think it's also in education. But the fact is a lot of people, they have a system and they have a method, and here's what it is, and they ask, what job can my product do? What, versus what progress do people want to make? And so what you realize is that when we have a supply side view of innovation, we try to take the current products we have, and we try to say, what jobs can we do? And we engineer products of what we think people want. And so my favorite is when you talk to a healthcare organization, they say, look, I have a product or a service that can prevent 100% of heart attacks. I can tell people exactly what to do. I can tell them what tests they have to run. I can tell them what exercises they have to eat. I can tell them what to eat. Literally, I can prevent 100% heart attacks. The problem is there's no demand for it. The people who actually, when you start to look at when people actually sign up for those things, it's after they've had a heart attack. They actually change their behavior because of the heart attack. And so the notion of trying to get people to prevent is actually a very different game than a way in which to get people to respond. And so part of this is, there's lots of times where I work with people and say, I have these resources, what jobs can I do? But the reality is that demand works very differently. Demand all starts with the aspect of, I have a current product, I have a current context, I have a struggling moment, I decide that I want to do something better. That better has outcomes to it. Then I actually have candidates, and I choose hire and fire criteria. And so what happens is, the way that demand works is fundamentally different than how supply works. And so for me, I always start on the demand side and then design things as opposed to supply things and try to push it to people. So for me, real growth and real progress is only started from struggling moments. So when people don't struggle, there is no ability to do anything but their habit. And so you can try to inspire people to do something different, but that inspiration usually creates a gap, which creates a push, which then creates the outcome. So the reality is if you look at how things work, is inspiration without some causal push underneath it, people will never value it. Or my experience is, I don't know how to work that way. So shouldn't say it never, but my experience is, I know I have not been successful as much as I've tried to be on inspirational type, innovation type projects. I'm going to do this last one. So I actually created this to help me understand the intent, because I couldn't understand what consumers meant by stuff and unpacking it. I basically want to make sure I understand the causal elements of what caused. So for example, talking to somebody who said, yeah, I trusted this person, so I bought from them. And I would say, like, what do you mean you trusted them? You've only met them 3 times. Yeah, but they did 3 things that made me trust them. And one of the things that they made them trust them was they said no to me. And if you know anything, anybody who's in sales, the reality is when somebody says yes all the time, the customer actually gets really nervous, because it's like, well, what won't they do? Does that mean they're going to say yes to everything and they won't actually deliver on anything? And so the interesting part is how the consumer perceives and causes trust. Identifying the trade-offs, building a common language, blah, blah, blah. 3 tips. 1, find struggling moments. Go after struggling moments. Struggling moments are the only place to help people make progress. Just by trying to inspire them, I don't believe that actually works. Second is think about progress, not the products. So frame the progress people are trying to make, and then try to design your product or service to fit in that progress they're trying to make. And the last part is identify the trade-offs. And it comes from Jason Fried, but the notion is that you're better off with a kick-ass half than a half-ass whole. And the way I would say it is, Southwest Airlines doesn't care if you complain about their food or the snacks or the drinks, because it doesn't prevent you from flying Southwest. Southwest competes with the bus and driving yourself. It time doesn't compete with flying with Delta. And so part of this is by understanding the value code, you understand what you can suck at. And by understanding what you can suck at, you can be better at the things that are important, which is being on time, being low cost, and being predictable. Last part, innovation, my greatest innovation. I'm sitting with Clay. Clay asked me a question. He says, what's your greatest innovation ever? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that way. I had no idea. He goes, no, here's some context. I'm like, all right. Clay's a Mormon. I'm a Catholic. And we go back and forth, and he always tries to convert me. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, here we go. He's going to say, this is going to have some angle to it. He goes, you're dead. St. Peter's got a list. What's on your list that actually gets you into heaven? I'm like, oh, that's an interesting question. So I realized it's not going to be the Patriot Missile Guidance System. That killed people, so that's not going to work. And Pokemon mac and cheese is like, that's just too much pleasure. So I start to go back and forth, and I realize it goes back to Deming when I was driving Deming around. And one of the things that happened is every time I drive Deming, I had to drive, he was 85, and I'd be in the car. And every time we'd be in a rental car, I'd have to go return the car full. And so I'd have to fill it up. And I'd literally slowly drive into the gas station. And Deming would be yelling at me like, why are you slowing down? Just pull up. And then I'd pull up on the wrong side, and I'd have to basically figure out where the gas tank was, and I'd be stretching over, and he'd be like yelling at me about something about being this equality problem. So in 1987, he basically went to my boss and said, this was a problem, and this is what the gas tank looked at, the Taurus Sable. And it took me a ridiculous amount of work, but the thing that I helped come up with, a team of us, of course, but is this little arrow on the gas tank. And my belief is that it's the half of you have seen it and go, thank God I have that. The other half of the room is like, oh my God, I didn't even know that was there. But this is the little thing that I make no money on it. It's like everybody has it. It wasn't protected in any way, but it's that little thing that has protected gas spills and accidents and all that, all the anxiety of going to the gas station basically for years. So, and that's it. I'm done. Now we got Q&A, baby.
Before we go into Q&A, I just want to say I travel all the time. I rent cars. Thank you so much.
So but to be honest, you don't realize how big a deal it is. And it's like, to be honest, it's the little struggling moments where I think we can do a lot of little things to help people make a lot of progress. And so many people are trying to make big things. And my real point to this is like, even the littlest thing, though it doesn't do a lot all the time, it's there at the right point at the right time that it adds value.
Bob, that was fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions. So please, everyone, unmute yourself and let's dive in.
I'll jump in. Bob, thanks so much. I have a question about the translation process between the job of help me X to design requirements. Can you talk about that and how you've
Yeah, it's so the first thing is to understand that causality, and a job is usually about when I'm in this situation and I'm struggling with this thing, and then it's like the verb, which is help, enable, guide. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of roles that they want that thing to help them with, and then it's the outcome. So the job statement itself is very, very specific, and is in terms of we're trying to make sure that it take a lot of time to understand the boundaries of, I'll say, the job statement. So it's not loosely like, oh, more convenient water, right? That's just not a job. You have to articulate the struggling moment, not at a story level, but at a high enough level that it encompasses a set of stories and meaningful enough that you understand what people are going to buy. The second part then is to figure out the products that they choose. This is where we would prototype. And so in this case, we're prototyping not to prototype the solution. We're prototyping because they have no language in which to articulate what they're really talking about. So for example, I just did, let me think of something that like mattresses. Consumers have no language which to talk about how they understand what a mattress is and how it works. And so how do you actually give them enough prototypes to actually understand what do they mean by words, and how do we actually, what's the phenomenon? Because a lot of cases they'll say it's firm or it's too soft. And the fact is, as soft as there's a cushion top, and then there's actually firmness in the bed, and they're two completely different things from a phenomenon perspective. And we had to create a whole new set of language to talk about that cushion level and then this firmness level. And so we're able to actually use prototyping to do that. But it's not, again, not prototyping in the context of trying to find the solution. It's prototyping in sense of being able to get them to articulate requirements. So the phrase I use is context creates value and contrast creates meaning. And so that role of, let's say, level 2 of is really about making sure that we have enough contrast so we can understand what's the difference and what's the value. One example I can give you is in the home business. What I would do is I would force people to go look at 3 really, really different homes I would build or that I built. And that what would happen is as much as they say they never wanted a ranch, they always liked the basement. They liked the fact that they didn't have stairs, like that they couldn't imagine. They had the notion of what a ranch was, but they actually had no notion of kind of what the other benefits of it were. And so by showing them 3 really, really different things, they were actually able to give us meaningful input to design a way better house. So as opposed to giving them 3 different center entrance colonials, which most of them can't remember the differences. Did that help?
Hi, Bob. This is Karen Perlman.
Yeah.
I wonder if you think that there's ever a value in the product that is as valuable as the consumer. So I work at a legacy organization. Yep. The synagogue is 100 years old. It is its own. It has like all this meaning.
Yep.
And as we're trying to innovate it to make sure that we're actually reaching consumers of a new generation, we're having to make sense to what is the institution. And besides the generational pieces, we're wondering, does the institution, does the legacy have a value if it's actually not serving customers?
So that's a great question. So first of all, the way I would describe it is an organization doesn't have a job. Individuals have jobs. Products, right? But the fact is the only one who can judge it are people. And this is why it's so hard, because it's back and forth. And so the way I look at it is I have a very similar problem with a school that's 180 years old and legacy, and there's a board. And the board believes that their role is to actually maintain the legacy. And so part of it is like these trees are really, really important for like they've been there forever and they're part of the legacy of this school. But the reality is that it's a trade-off that they have to be able to think about. If they want to be able to grow or service the area better, these trees have to come down, and you have these back and forth. So so right now I'm doing it for the school board. What is the goal, or what is the jobs of why people are on the school board? And then based on those jobs of the school board, how do I build alignment to what progress really looks like for the school? And then understanding how to do that, and then basically then map it to what's the progress of what the parents want for the students that they're sending to that school. And so to me, it's identifying the gaps and being able to understand, like, if you don't change, here's what consumers will do. Because now I have the mechanism of what the consumer will do, and I have the mechanism of what we can do, and now it becomes a choice. Otherwise, it never even becomes a choice, because it's like, well, this is what we should always do. And this is what we've always done. So to me, it's about framing progress from different perspectives that help you actually figure out how to manage that trade-off. Did that make any sense, or was I out of? Yeah, good. Okay.
Bob, I've got one question. This idea of the struggling moment.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about what advice would you give to, whether it's pastors who are serving a church, rabbis, or even, spiritual entrepreneurs who are developing new startups. What advice would you give to folks who are looking to find and identify those struggling moments? Where do you look? What lenses do you need to see them in and around a community? What advice would you give to, innovators and entrepreneurs? And
what I would do is I'd actually look where people are bitching a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they're complaining. The other thing is for example, so my favorite is I was out in Bozeman, Montana with Bozeman Health, and I saw a president that satisfaction levels of healthcare are 23%. And I'm like, and the hardest part is to just everybody just accepts going to the doctor are shitty. It's like, okay, now we can actually figure out kind of like, how do we actually make that a place where they want to make progress? So to me, it's like, where do I find a place where everybody is just satisfied, do something else? So again, I go to banking. How many people want to switch banks? But it's like, well, the next bank's not going to be any better than the previous bank. But the reality is, as soon as you get Apple Pay, it's like, God, I don't have to carry a wallet, but now I don't have to do these things. I don't have to go anywhere. Like all of a sudden, it's like, so my thing is where people will realize that they don't want to do something, but they just keep doing it. And so that's where I think there's opportunity.
Great.
I don't know if that's specific enough, but there's very stringent criteria by which I do it. Like, so for example, I look for the edge of the law. So for example, if you look at the number of cab drivers who are literally going around, get a cab, not from the use the car service before Uber. It's like, well, how many people are actually doing that? How many people wanted that? How many people are counting on that? Why don't they take cabs? So from that struggling moment, we're like, that's how we can see Uber.
Great.
Bob, I had a question. I was intrigued by how you talked early on that you have been successful in the insurance business. And it strikes me that, and I've been thinking about this a lot, that religion is often sort of in the insurance business for a lot of people. That the real reason why they're paying the money is because they're about some future event, whether that's their immortal soul or just their upcoming wedding or funeral for their kid, wedding for their kid, funeral for themselves, or whatever might be happening. And I think that the challenge is sort of how do we get religion out of the insurance business and into a different business. And I guess I'm curious, like, how you would advise a company that was trying to do something like that.
So I've actually done quite a bit of work in this kind of space, because I actually so I've done quite a bit of interviews. I'm working on a book that's basically I'm interviewing people who have switched religions. So they've gone from Catholic to Jewish, or Muslim to say, like, why did you fire the old religion? And what are you hoping for by going to the new religion? And I want to pull the religion part out of it and basically say, like, look, when people are in this situation and this outcome, here's how they hire and here's how they decide. and to realize that there's not one job, but there's multiple jobs that religion does. And so to me, there's some very key jobs that I guess I could talk a little bit about. One is this sense of community, and the other one is a sense of purpose. And so what happens is that people will go through life and they'll leave, they'll go agnostic, or they'll just say, I'm not practicing anymore. And then at some point in time, they get into life and somebody dies, and somebody close to them, or they start to actually address their own mortality, and they realize either they have so much time left, or that the previous time has gone by so fast that they want to, it's not about the fear of dying. It's more about what else can I do with what the time I have left to be more meaningful. All of a sudden you start to realize they start to look for people who have similar values and have similar ways of saying what meaning means to them. And so it's not hedging the death, but more hedging the rest of life. And all of a sudden, they're actually looking for places to volunteer. So to me, you're actually like the church, the religions are actually competing with not-for-profits, because it's a way in which to give back to which they still do through the church or through the religious organization, or they could do it through the not-for-profit. But the aspect that's so interesting is if I go do something for profit, that's not actually as meaningful. But the reality is when you give them the idea of, well, why don't you go do that for profit and donate it to the church? They're like, oh, I could do that. And so I think the notion is being able to understand what's meaningful at different points in time in people's lives. It's like, I think the greatest of organized religion for single people in, I'll say in the 20s and 30s is CrossFit, because it gives them a sense of purpose. It gives them a sense of community. They help each other. They do all the, like, everything but the faith part of it. But it's this notion of meeting people. And to be honest, 30, 50 years ago, that's exactly how you met your spouse and how you did different things. I mean, it's all the CrossFit did. CrossFit just happened to do this little part better. And so you have people who say they can't get to church but once a Sunday, but can go to CrossFit 5 days a week. Right? And so I think part of it is framing it on what people are getting and what progress are they trying to make, and are they trying to be ready for the day, or are they actually trying to have a more meaningful life, or are they actually trying to make sure that they raise good children, or they follow their parents' wishes. There's a whole bunch of reasons, and part of it is being able to understand, but it's not what we all think. Again, I don't think people are buying for the reasons that a lot of religions are selling, what they think they're selling.
But could I sort of ask you the flip side of that? Because I think the religious organizations struggle. Their business up till now has been to provide like a really complex and sort of all-encompassing product to a small number of people, and then essentially to provide an insurance product to a large number of people. But they have to shift to be providing like an impact, a day by every day to this large number of people. And like you were saying earlier, the only way to do that financially would be to start with a very sort of low quality product, right? Because you're now having provided to so many more people, and they really struggle with that because they compare it to the high quality product that they've been providing to the small number of people, and they don't think it's worth doing, and so then they don't want to do it.
That's right, and that's basically what Clay talks about is the innovator's dilemma. Is you have a value code that it has to be to this standard, and the reality is they're willing to actually have a kick-ass half, and you're only willing to have a kick-ass whole, and the reality is it ends up being a half-ass whole that nobody wants. And so part of this is why in some cases it might be that you have to create this spiritual entrepreneurialism, because the only way to be successful in very large organizations with disruptive innovations is to literally spin them off and have them have their own value code, and then bring them back in when they actually meet the criteria for the rest of the standards of everybody else. But if you try to make the new innovation and in the business world, you say have the same margins and have the same volume as everything else, you realize you can't launch anything. And so part of this is so we end up trying to figure out how to leverage the business as opposed to figuring out how to help people make progress. And so it's how really, really small organizations can literally kill very large organizations. So So think of Dollar Shave Club. My belief is P&G had the idea and they did everything with it, but the reality is when they came down to it, it was like, no, the retailers will get mad. We can't really do this. We can't do that. So what they did is they let a competitor go into the market with an inferior razor, an easier way to buy. This competitor, Unilever, bought it for $1 billion. Right? And so it's this is the dilemma where I think by being able to help people understand what, like by in some cases, it's more risky to do nothing than to do something. And most people only think risk is about change, but everything around us is changing. So we have to actually make sure risk is relative and people understand that staying the same and in most time is more risky than not changing at all.
I think we've got time for maybe one or two final questions. Bob, I know you've got a sprint to go back. So I want to honor that commitment. So let's just kind of go around, see if there's any lingering questions, one or two of them, and then we'll close up.
I have one question around, hi. Kürşat, around trade-offs. Can you talk a little bit about, especially in healthcare, like when there are so many stakeholders, like how do you manage or deal?
So I have a very good example I did with Carolina Healthcare, which is, so the fact is like we did jobs and we basically said, when do you go? These are non-emergency healthcare visits. So it's like I have an infection, I have a rash. It's not that I broke my leg. But it's like, how do I decide when do I go to the primary care physician? When do I go to Minute Clinic? When do I go to the emergency room? And it's like, and what's the hiring and firing criteria for it? And so for example, if I've had it before, I think I know what it is. I need a prescription. Basically, and to be honest, and I have no other real health problems. I consider myself healthy. My belief, or what we learned was, these people are willing to trade off from seeing their primary care physician to saying, just show me somebody who can get me my prescription and literally do it as fast as they can. And so in some cases, in terms of seeing the right person, they'll make the trade-off. But if somebody is, I've got several conditions. I'm taking a high cholesterol medication. I've got diabetes. I've had this before, but I needed to go into my record so something else doesn't get screwed up. I'm actually willing to wait to see the right doctor who has my record so I don't get sicker. And so there's certain conditions where again, if they don't know if it's going to affect their, so like, think of that. I've had a sinus infection for 15 years, taking Plavix. I actually don't know if my sinus medication will interact with my Plavix. So I'm going to go, I'll wait a couple of days to go get in to make sure I can see my primary care physician, or at least somebody who has my records, going to Mary, right? The craziest part is this, is that when I don't know what it is, and I have expectations I have to fix for other people. So we're going to go somewhere, I've been out of work for these. The emergency room is actually there for a couple of reasons. One is, help me make sure I know what it is. Help me figure out what it is. And if not, tell me what I have to go do to figure it out. Minute Clinic is not qualified for that job. So one, they're willing to wait. But the other part is, I need a qualified referral to make sure I can change everybody's expectations. And so you start to realize that they're willing, that not only do they want to know what it is, but they need to know how to communicate it back to people about, so, hey, I can't go to this wedding this weekend, or I can't do this, or I won't be into work for a couple of weeks. And so the aspect of being able to have a legitimate, just get me work, are trade-offs people make all the time. It's the reason why Minute Clinic is so successful and virtual visits are becoming more and more successful, is that it only serves a small part, but it's serving actually the easiest part to serve. And most doctors would say they would want that business because it's the easier part. But the reality is they make it the hardest to actually consume. Because it's like, hey, I call my doctor and it's like 4 hours. See you in 3 weeks. It's like, no, I have a sinus infection. No, he doesn't have any openings. What am I supposed to do? And so this is where non-consumption happens.
It's interesting, Bob, just to echo that, and then we'll close out, is when you talk about the folks who are willing to wait for their doctor because they want to make sure that their records stay, that this someone who has access to the records will add to the records, versus the folks who are willing to go to the minute clinic because they just need the prescription.
Right.
In American religion, what we're seeing actually is that baby namings, bar and bat mitzvahs, weddings, those are the ones that are getting performed by the justice of the peace, by the good friend who quotes a poem or one piece of liturgy, by the non-ordained person who kind of serves it. But it's the funerals that are actually the most likely for people to go to, or for families to turn to a rabbi, a pastor, a priest, imam, who has known their family for a long time and almost, like you said, has that the record of the person and has the credibility. And it's that's the one that is the slowest to be supplanted by those sort of itinerant.
But I think, again, you do that job very well. I think the thing is you took for granted the other jobs that came along with it. Exactly. And the reality is that it's going to be one of those things where, like, what we learned is Catholic Church, they had rec leagues, and it's one of the things they got rid of first, because it's like, well, that's just all entertainment. That's all just, it's social. It's not at the core of what we're talking about. And so they cut back the rec league. Well, the rec league was the way in which to get everybody together. The rec league was the way in which to have the social aspects. The rec league is where most of the stuff happened. And when they gave it up, that's where CrossFit just literally walked it. Like, I don't think CrossFit went in and purposely to do it, but the reason why it's more than a gym is the actual social aspects of it, and the notion of helping each other to achieve a goal is a really underlying piece of what the rec league was about.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely. And I'll say this as somebody who I'm soon to run my 10th Tough Mudder. And I know that you're saying CrossFit they weren't intentional about supplanting that space for the rec leagues, but I run my Tough Mudders on Sunday mornings, go down on one knee, say a prayer together, commit to the 10 virtues of Tough Mudder running, and then they have someone give a sermon to get us all excited about, and then we wear the same headband. These are right out of the religious playbook, and it's very intentional when they're thinking about the jobs to be done as it applies to what people are hiring. Exactly. Tough Mudder.
But the hardest part is when I want to get married, I can't really get married at the Tough Mudder.
Right.
Or
no, not yet. Not yet, but give it time. By next year.
So I think I hope this was helpful for everybody. My thing is hopefully it's food for thought, and ultimately find struggling moments and manage trade-offs, and to be honest, you'll be able to change the world.
Thank you. Bob, thank you so very much. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation soon. Yeah. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Yeah. Questions were enriching, and your presence was felt, and we're grateful for it. So thank you everybody. To be continued.
Bye-bye, everybody.